Welcome to A Slob Comes Clean, the podcast. I am Dana K. White. I share my personal deslobification process. As I figure out ways to keep my own home under control, I share the truth about cleaning and organizing strategies that actually work in real life for real people. People who don't love cleaning and organizing. Thanks for joining me today. This is podcast number 439, and I think I'm going to call it, So how long did it take to declutter my house? Here's the thing. I get asked this question a lot. I usually get asked this question by people who are somewhat new to my process. I think that there's some relief and excitement. I get it, right? Over finding someone who they're like, wait, were you in a situation like mine? Finding someone who actually dug their way out, as opposed to, a lot of times when people talk about this stuff, it's because they enjoy it and maybe it never got to the point that my house was at, right? So I do get asked this question by people who are new because I get it, right? Like, how long is this going to take? I want to be done. I would like to know that if I start doing this, I could have a different house in a week or a month or by Christmas next year or whatever. Like, I completely understand this desire to know how it's going to work, right? Like, and this is the time of year that I'm getting more of these questions, because this is the time of year where people are finding me for the first time because people are decluttering bananas right now, right? Like, they're not decluttering their bananas. There are bananas for decluttering, right? This is the new year, new you. Like, in the marketing world, when you're doing books, they're like, oh, we're going to do a new year, new you push. And I'm like, I'm a big fan of like, new year, same you. Let's embrace the way we are. But whatever, I'm just saying, this is the time of year where it is a natural thing to be thinking about this. And so it is a question that I received. The desire is, can I put it on the calendar that my house will be done being decluttered by such and such point? Okay. I give you my timeline. That's what I'm going to do today. I'm kind of, I've written down, I've kind of thought back through how long it took me to get my house decluttered. Spoiler, my house is still not perfect and it's never going to be. And that's actually a big part of it for me, is accepting that. But anyway, we'll get into that more. But I recommend, if you're willing to hear it, I recommend that you take this idea of, when am I going to be finished and what date can I put on my calendar of start having parties on this date because my house will be done, that you take that whole idea and that whole question and just say, that's an irrelevant question. That's not a helpful question to have answered, partly because there is no answer, because you're never going to be done decluttering, but also because everybody's situation is different. And the real reason is that when you put it on the calendar, it feels like a deadline, right? Like, you're probably not thinking of it that way when you ask the question of me, how long did it take for your house to be decluttered? And I say it like that. And I know that's not how you're asking it, right? Like, because a lot of you have probably actually either asked me this question directly or wondered it out loud, right? So I know you're not saying it like that, but I'm just saying, like, when you have that moment of like, okay, so how long is this going to take? How long did it take her? How long is it going to take? It feels like you're just asking that question, but what you're kind of doing is giving yourself a deadline. Like, okay, if she says it takes a year to go from I'm embarrassed to let people in my front door to my house being completely and totally decluttered, then I can say, all right, well, then in January of 2026, I will be a completely different person. Well, that works well for some people, and great, wonderful, but you're listening to me, which means you might relate to me in other ways. And I personally have found that while some deadlines are helpful, like for getting a project done, yes, it's on the calendar, that's helpful. Self-improvement deadlines can backfire. Okay. So what I'm saying is, we don't want it to backfire. And also, I don't know that it's necessary to know this, okay? Because when you have the deadline, then it feels like, okay, well then I'm going to block out certain amounts of time, and then okay, if she says a year from now, then that means every weekend for this whole entire 2025 I am going to declutter in my house. Okay, like it's going to be completely different. Or some of you are like, a year? What in the world? Some of a month, whatever, 2 months, whatever you say, I'm going to do this. And then life happens and you declutter this weekend, but then the next weekend, there's either something you have to do or something you want to do. And you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't get to declutter, or I didn't even think about decluttering, or I didn't feel like decluttering after all the work that I did last week. And so now I've missed one of those weekends. Okay, I'll get back to it next weekend. And then life happens again or whatever. And you end up missing some, and it feels like, oh, well, I'm never going to make that deadline now. And because you had turned it into a deadline in your mind, then it starts to feel like, well, what's the point, right? Like that, those are a lot of the things that I talk about, is how to prevent that very natural tendency I have toward getting myself into a, well, what's the point situation. If you're new here, a little bit about me. I wrote the book Decluttering at the Speed of Life. I created the No Mess Decluttering process. It's a 5-step process that applies to any situation, any level of clutter, and you can make real progress in any amount of time that you have available. So if you have a week, which we talked about last week, or if you have 3 minutes or 30 seconds or 4 hours or whatever amount of time that you have, if you follow the process, you're going to make real, actual, sustainable decluttering progress. Okay. That's a very short version of what Decluttering at the Speed of Life is 60,000 words about, right? And then I have lots and lots of words here on the podcasts and the videos and all that kind of stuff. But that's why I encourage you to just listen to what I say on, like, how long did it take for me to declutter my house, and go, okay. Some of you are going to be like, well, that's discouraging. And some of you are going to think, oh, that's really encouraging. But to know that it really doesn't even matter. I'm just kind of giving you my timeline. It's not a prescription in any way. The advice that I have is to, while you're listening, if you're in your home and you're able, grab a black trash bag and start throwing away trash while you listen. Because if you do that over the course of the next 30-ish minutes or however long this podcast ends up being, because I never know, then if you do that for those 30 minutes, your house will be better than it is right now. If you pick up that bag right now and you declutter for the rest of the time you listen, your house is going to be better. Even if you get tired of listening and turn it off after 30 seconds, if you throw away trash for 30 seconds, your house is going to be better than it was before you started this podcast. Because that's the reality. And that's also the big mindset shift, right? Is going from, when am I going to be done, to how can I make this better? Changing your goal from done to better. That one shift is the thing that will change your house more than any big plan, more than any research that you do, is just shifting from making your goal being to be done decluttering to making your house better. Because anything you do, anything, achieves the goal of better. That success of doing one thing and having achieved the goal of better will spur you on to keep working. Where, like I just talked about, if your goal is done and you have this date on the calendar and that date starts getting closer and you think there's no way, meanwhile, you haven't done anything because the goal of done was so completely daunting and overwhelming that you could never get started, then that never actually happens. But better is not a daunting goal. It's not. And there's so much value in it not being, in your goal not being daunting. So let's talk about it. Let's talk first too about, what do you mean when you maybe ask the question or wonder the question, or other people, if you have never wondered that question, most of you have, how long did it take you to declutter your house? What is it that you're picturing when you're asking that question? Because you're asking about it for yourself, right? Are you picturing a perfect home? Like, is that the end goal? Is like, are you asking me how long did it take for you to get your house perfect? If that's your question, welcome. You must be new here because my house is never perfect. Or are you asking how long did it take you for your house to not be out of control, to not be overwhelming to you? How long did it take for your house to not be something that just weighed you down as a stress point? I have achieved the goal of my house not holding me back anymore. The state of my home is such because I have decluttered so much stuff, literal truckloads. I've decluttered so much stuff and done some other things that we're going to talk about in this podcast today, that my house doesn't hold me back anymore. If I want to offer my home to somebody who needs a place to sleep tonight, I can do that. And it doesn't stress me out. Every once in a while, I have residual physical feeling of, oh, you can, and I'm like, wait, no, I actually can do that. Even though it's been well over a decade since my house was so completely out of control that I could never even dream of offering my house to someone without weeks' notice, right? My house doesn't hold me back from hosting things. It's not a huge stressor to host Thanksgiving or New Year's Eve or whatever. My house does not hold me back from feeling like I can go do things and commit to things, because that was a big part of my problem. That's actually my story, right? Is that I say right, some of y'all may not know, but my story is that I wanted to be a writer and I found out what blogs were. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to have a blog because I want to learn how to be a writer. And that sounds like something I should be doing. This was back in 2009. And I didn't start my blog for a year and a half because my house was holding me back. The guilt over my home, this need to, I have got to figure this out. It's always such a disaster. It's so frustrating to me. That was holding me back, not just from doing things in my home, but just from doing other things in life, right? So that's my definition. I have gotten rid of so much stuff that even when my house does get bananas because the holidays happen or big projects happen or whatever, it's like 30 minutes, maybe to an hour to get everything back into place, because things actually have places where they didn't have places before. So then things would explode and be everywhere. And it was just this overwhelming thing all the time. So what is it that you're asking? Okay. So I want to clarify that is what I'm talking about on how long it took me to get to the point where my house didn't hold me back anymore. My house was easy for me to control. It didn't overwhelm me anymore. And it didn't keep me from doing the things that I wanted to do in life, right? Which I now realize was my goal, even though I didn't know that was my goal. Of course, I looked at other people's, or Pinterest didn't exist when I started, but magazines is what you say. But like, of course, I looked at pictures of beautiful homes and thought, that's what I want my house to look like. Now I realize, okay, I love a picture of a beautiful home. I love it when my house looks pretty, but I also like, that's not my driving factor, right? Like that, it just isn't. And so for me, I realized, oh, okay, over time, as I just decluttered, it just clarified my goal, because I realized the more I decluttered, the more I was getting to do the things that make me me, as opposed to then making my house this magazine worthy, Pinterest worthy, setting or whatever. Cause I just realized that that's not the thing that's most important to me. I like it. It's great. It's wonderful. It's important to you, but I'm just saying, like, that's what I'm talking about. That's where I'm coming from. Okay. I do want to say a little plug here. I am officially announcing that my new book comes out on February 11th. I know I've kind of been like vaguely mentioning it, but not really giving details. Yeah, I am releasing my newest book. This is the one that makes my heart palpitate the most, for sure. So I feel like it's relevant to this subject matter of my story and my timeline. If you kind of like the behind the scenes, wait, let's get down to the nitty gritty. This is the book If you like more to the story kind of stuff, this book is the spiritual side of things. So it is called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. So y'all, I mean, I don't talk a ton about my faith on here, but y'all know that I'm a Christian, right? So this is the side of this is the spiritual side of this deslobification process for me. So if you want to find out more, you can go to aslobcomesclean.com/Jesus. So let's go back and let's go through the timeline. I do want to be clear here. Y'all know that, I mean, you may not realize this, but sometimes y'all will email me or we'll be talking in whatever situation. You're like, you know how you said such and such on podcast number 30. And I'm like, yeah, I have no idea. Like, I literally have no idea. I've been doing these podcasts for 11 and a half years now, I think. So it's funny because you may have just heard me say something. Maybe you've listened to old podcasts. Maybe you read a book of mine, whatever. And I mean, I've put a lot of words out there into the world. And so if you just read me say something that gives a different timeline on this, know that it's my mistake. Sometimes details get fuzzy. I'm going to do my best. Okay. So I don't want you to be like, wait a minute. She just said 2002. And in such and such, see, she said that happened in 2001 or 3 or whatever. It's my fault. Okay. So 2002, I know we're talking about over 20 years ago. I had babies, had little kids. I was in a different house in a different area of Texas. And I remember, well, I mean, yes, it was a big moment. I started selling on eBay. I started selling on eBay because I had been married probably 4 years maybe at that point. And I was overwhelmed by all my stuff. And I started to notice, it just hit me, things that I had gotten as wedding presents that were still in the box that I had never used. Right. And so I thought, I need to get rid of some of this stuff. I had a friend that I had made in a mom's group who sold on eBay. And it was one of those things where it's like, oh, that's neat. You sell on eBay. No, I mean, she really sold on eBay. She was one of those people who would like get a wholesale deal with so-and-so and sell things. I mean, like, so she ended up having, I mean, she has an amazing, huge business now. Right. But this was back in the days where I was like, oh, that's neat what you do. But she had told me about it. She's like, Danny, you should really, you should sell some things on eBay. It's really fun. It's a way to make money. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to sell some of these things that I have in my house. So that was a goal of decluttering. So I knew I had a problem, right? Like I knew I had clutter and I knew I needed to get some out. And so I started selling on eBay for that. Well, my story of eBay was that I had been selling the things I already had. I think I sold an iced tea maker, a juicer, a milkshake maker. I mean, I just sold several small appliances that I'd never taken out of the box. And I went to a garage sale. And at this garage sale, I saw this really cute bedazzler, but it wasn't called a bedazzler. It was something like real vintage. And it was metal, so it wasn't anything plastic on it. It was like a old fashioned thing, had some of the actual little diamonds with it. So it was really cool looking. And it was 10 cents, 10 cents in the box and everything. And I had been selling some things on eBay and I thought, I wonder if that would sell on eBay. This is before phones, before we had phones, but we didn't like carry a cell phone, especially not a smartphone. I don't think they were invented yet around with this. And so I just thought, I'm going to see what I can do. I sold it for $17.49 and I paid 10 cents for it. And I went, well, that was fun. And I started buying things at garage sales to sell on eBay. So what I started doing eBay for was to declutter. But then I got the bug, not knowing. I mean, I was just starting to realize I think I actually like business stuff, right? So I was selling things on eBay and it ended up ultimately sending me to rock bottom on my clutter problems, right? Now, I had clutter before this. The milkshake maker was not my clutter. My clutter if you've read Decluttering at the Speed of Life, you've read the story of the apartment that was basically a 2-bedroom with one whole bedroom completely full because I wanted to wait until I was in my real house, So, I mean, all of this, I'd had clutter my entire life, right? But the decluttering journey is what we're talking about here. So that was an attempt to declutter that ended up backfiring, right? So that goes on while my kids were little. I am in no way saying, oh, no one should sell on eBay because I needed it. I mean, that was our only extra money that we had when my kids were little. So I totally understand a lot of you are eBay sellers. Like a lot of you, that's what you do. And so I get it. I would make $40 a week and that would be the money that we would eat out with, And so I know because things were cheaper and we didn't have kids who ate more than just off of our plate, right? So that time period, probably for about 6 years or so there, we had moved. In 2008, I started getting into coupons. Couponing was my new obsession in 2008. And at that point, I stopped with the eBay because I was saving enough money that I didn't need to make the money on eBay. Okay. And I was completely overwhelmed by all of the stuff and what it had done to my house. I had an entire, very large game room that was my eBay room. Okay. I've told the story before. We had a half bath in there. It was at the back of the room. We didn't use it for the first several years that we lived in that house because we couldn't get to it because that was my eBay room and it was blocked by all of the stuff that I had in there. Right. So I was tired of being completely overwhelmed by that totally messy room. And when I stopped selling on eBay because I was saving enough money to make up for what I had made on eBay through couponing, then that's when I decided I need to get this room cleaned out. And so I had several garage sales, big time garage sales. I knew garage sales well, and I knew how well they did when you just priced everything at 25 and 50 cents. So, I mean, I sold things cheap, got it out of there, got things out of my house. And so I cleaned out that big room before I started the blog, right? So I do want to say real quick, one of the best tips I ever heard, and it's from the Nester, Michael and Smith. She's been on the podcast a couple times when different books of hers have come out, but she's a decorator. She's amazing and she's hilarious. But one of the things I heard her say was when people would say, hey, I want to, this is back in the blogging days, when blogging was the big thing, right? I want to start a blog so I can make some money. She's like, that's great. And I never want to discourage anybody from that. But she's like, the best guaranteed way to quote unquote make money is to save money, like to get into the money saving game. Anyway, I know coupons are different now than they were when I did them because of the whole digital everything, but I just thought that was really wise advice on her part. But okay, so I cleaned out that room, but I was still completely overwhelmed with my house, right? In 2008, through my couponing, I discovered what blogs were. The minute I knew what they were, I was like, this is it. I've got to have one. Didn't start it for a year and a half. Then started it. A lot of that story y'all have heard before, but I really go into the spiritual side of that in, the new book, Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House, coming out February 11th. But also that time period, I was trying really hard to get my house under control. Okay. But I wasn't thinking of myself as decluttering. I didn't know yet the power of decluttering to get my house under control. Okay. I was just trying to work on my house. I was trying to get organized and nothing was working. Nothing had any kind of lasting effect to the point where for a year and a half, I didn't start this thing that I was desperate to do because my house continued to stay so completely overwhelming to me. And I felt like such a failure at it that I was like, I can't take on something new. I've got to figure this out. So in 2009, I started A Slob Comes Clean as a practice blog. It was not supposed to be the thing I was going to write about. I made up a fake name because I thought I'm just going to do this for a couple months, get my house under control. Haha. Here we are 15 years later, right? almost 16 years later. Whew. Anyway, this was the reality. I didn't know how to change my home. I had not been able to figure out how to change my home. I was glad that I had decluttered that eBay room, that room was now usable, but I didn't understand how to make my house a different house. So when I started A Slob Comes Clean as my experimental, temporary practice, anonymous blog, I started by focusing on doing the dishes. And I know your question, if you had the question, was how long did it take you to declutter your house? And I'm talking about doing the dishes. I always tell people you have to declutter and you have to do basic daily stuff. If there has to be a choice between the two, go with the basic daily stuff. The basic daily stuff is where actually changing your house is going to happen. I'm so sorry. I know it's terrible news. I don't like it either, but it legitimately is not possible to change your home without getting the basic daily stuff down. And the most basic of the basic daily stuff is doing the dishes. If you can't do anything else, do the dishes. If you are like, what's my goal for this year? I'm completely overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. Your goal is to do the dishes today. That's what it is. Or do as many dishes as you can do today. And then do them again tomorrow before there's actually enough to be worth your time, right? And then do them again the next day, because doing the dishes is the thing that changed my home. And I know we're talking about decluttering, but the second part of my process is the easy stuff, is the procrasticlutter. Procrasticlutter is the stuff that you're like, well, yeah, of course that has to be done. And so it feels like, no, I'm going to declutter. I'm going to do like the big stuff. I'm going to really declutter. And so it's easy to skip the procrasticlutter because you're like, no, I'll do dishes later. But if the kitchen counters are covered with every dish that you own because they're all dirty and they're piled up and you can't work in your kitchen, if your kitchen is like that, I know from experience, no matter what I would do in my house never felt like I'd done anything. I mean, my house never improved as long as the dishes were out of control. So start with the dishes, because here's the other thing. When I started, I literally said, what is the smallest thing I can do? Because I was so completely confident that I was going to fail again, because I had always failed every time I had tried to change my home. And I said, what is it that I can do in my home that won't be overwhelming? And I just said, I have no idea how to do the dishes. I don't know how people, I mean, I know how to do the dishes, right? But I don't know how people don't constantly have dirty dishes sitting in their sink. I literally didn't know how they did it. It felt like they must spend every moment of every day doing dishes. But I also knew that they weren't doing that because they were having a lot of fun in life. And I could go over there and they weren't stressed out and blah, 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 because the dishes had already been done without even knowing I was coming over, right? Anyway, do the dishes. That's what I did. That's what changed my home. I started by focusing on the daily stuff. And yes, I was decluttering at the same time, but the more I focused on the daily stuff, the more I freed up time to declutter. That's the problem, right? Is you think I don't have time to do the dishes because I really need to declutter right now. But then this other weird thing happens in your brain where you're like, there's so many things to do in my house. And you feel that way because everything's out of control because the daily stuff hasn't been done. And it's like, no, I need to declutter. I need to declutter. But I just keep saying that because it's like, but there's just so much and it's so overwhelming and it just feels like everywhere I look is worse than the other place. And it's like, how do I make any traction? I make traction by doing the dishes. And doing the dishes, focusing on daily small tasks, freed up so much time to declutter. I hear this from people all the time. I know that you don't believe me if you're in the situation where you're completely overwhelmed. Try it. Because dishes math is real. If your dishes have been out of control consistently, you don't know how long it takes to do the dishes every day because you've only done catching up. One day's worth of dishes takes 10, 15 minutes. I would have argued you, and I would have probably thought that I won, even though I would have been wrong, that was not the case for me. No, that's not true. No, it does not take me 10 to 15 minutes. But I didn't know because I'd never done one day's worth of dishes consistently, right? I had only ever done catch up sessions. And so I was doing math and saying, well, if it takes me 5 hours to do the dishes, after 5 days of not doing the dishes, that means it's an hour every day. I don't want to spend an hour every day doing the dishes. I need to declutter. But then I also wouldn't declutter because I felt like, oh no, I got to go do the dishes. Well, that's going to take me 5 hours, but then I'm never going to do the decluttering and then blah, blah, blah. And it's just this big, bad, vicious cycle, right? So focusing in on those daily habits will free up time and then use that time to declutter. That's what I did without knowing that that's what I was doing. I focused on the dishes. I would add a task every week because I found not from planning it out ahead of time, but I found that, okay, after doing the dishes every day for 7 days, I was like, oh, I get it now. Like I didn't call it dishes math yet. I didn't know that, but I got how to keep the dishes done by doing them every day for 7 days. And that wasn't overwhelming anymore. So I would add a new habit each week. You can go back and read if you go to aslobcomesclean.com. I think it's get started or new here or something like that. And it will tell you how to go back to the very beginning of the blog because a lot of people find that very encouraging to see this is what she did on day 1. This is what she did on day 2. This is where she messed up on day 3. I don't know which day it was, but there's lots of messing up. This is, because I would write about what I was doing. I would write about, why do I resist this? What is wrong? Why am I not wanting to do this? Or, oh my goodness, I did this. I didn't think it was making any impact at all. And it had a huge impact and blah, blah, blah. So like you learn the whole real time, actual me figuring this stuff out by reading the blog from the beginning. But I knew I needed to be decluttering, but instead I focused on the daily habits and it freed up so much time for decluttering. So the more I could declutter, the better. The other thing too was that I came to this point where I realized I thought I was giving up by saying, I'm going to give up on getting organized for right now. I'll do that later. For now, I'm just going to declutter. I'm just going to get stuff out. That's what changed my home. So we went back to, we talked about the question, how long did it take to declutter my house? Are you asking how long it took to declutter my house? Or are you asking how long did it take to get organized? Because I tried for years to get organized, all kinds of systems and all kinds of solutions and all kinds of baskets and buckets and bins. But my house never got better as long as I was organizing. It only got better when I decluttered. So really zero in on that, really zero in on the decluttering and make that the goal. So it was, let's see, August of 2009, started by focusing on dishes. That freed up so much time as I got daily stuff done. And that ended up freeing up so much time and I decluttered more. And then I realized that I hit my clutter threshold. I'm just going to guess here. I remember starting in 2009 in August. And then over Christmas, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm getting a lot of traffic on my new little blog. I mean, it wasn't a lot of traffic, but at the time it felt like a ton of traffic. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm getting a lot more traffic. I didn't know that the week between Christmas and New Year is the time when people go bananas for decluttering. Like I didn't know that. I was just like, oh, I'm getting some traffic here. So I was experiencing that. And I remember at that time thinking, okay, I've been adding a task a week from August, probably the end of August to the end of December. So that's what, about 4 months. And I went, I think I don't have to just keep adding tasks for the sake of adding tasks, basically. I was like, no, this is what matters. I have the 4 tasks that I recommend. If all of this is like tasks, do the dishes, what you need, how to manage your home without losing your mind. That's another one of my books. You can go to aslobcomesclean.com/book for all of my books. Just know that, yes, they're available wherever books are sold, but they're also available at most libraries. So if finances are an issue, check with your local library. If they don't have it, request it. Usually they'll let the person who requests it be one of the first people to check it out. But How to Manage Your Home Without Losing Your Mind is the one that talks you through all of this, like, wait, what? But I decided, I think I don't want to just arbitrarily add more tasks. I think I have it figured out. The 4 tasks that I recommend you focus on: first, do the dishes, sweep the kitchen, check the bathrooms for clutter, and do a 5-minute pickup. Okay. So those things had really changed my home. I had worked on laundry, because I know some people are like, but you have to do a load of laundry every day. I'm not going to go into that today, but it was by doing these weekly tasks and week after week after week, trying to make laundry every day my focus and failing at that, that I finally went, I'm just going to try laundry day. And that was what worked. Okay. Spoiler. So that's why laundry is not one of my personal daily tasks, but it might be one of yours, right? Whatever works for you is what you should be doing. But once I had those down to where they didn't feel unnatural, to where they're still not automatic 15 years later, but I was like, no, I know what to do. I know to do the dishes. I know to do 5-minute pickup. I know to focus on these things. That got my house under control and kept my house under control. And then I went really hard into the decluttering. Okay. So in that second half of that year, and just decluttered and decluttered and decluttered and decluttered and kept decluttering, right? I believe I couldn't find it when I call it my clutter threshold, the point at which I only have in my house what I can easily keep under control, which means if my house is feeling hard for me to control, I need to get rid of stuff, right? I have too much stuff if I'm over my clutter threshold, if it's hard for me to keep under control. So I don't remember exactly when I realized, oh, my house is actually doable for me. I believe it was around a year-ish. Okay. I did look up when I put out 28 Days to Hope for Your Home, which is now part of How to Manage Your Home Without Losing Your Mind. But that was my first 28-day guide to, going from completely overwhelmed to knowing what to do to get your house under control. And I released that at the end of January in 2012. So I would say probably November of 2011. So around 2-ish years, to where I felt like, okay, my home is not overwhelming to me anymore. And the reason I say that, I point that out, is that I never wanted to share anything. I never wanted to teach anybody anything about the house, because I was like, no, this is hard for me. I'm not saying it wasn't hard for me anymore. I'm saying I knew what to do and I could keep my house under control. Okay. And I felt confident in that after about 2.5 years. So I would say, how long did it take me to declutter my house? I would say about 2 years, but I'm not done. And it's 15 years later, because there's always, always going to be things that need to leave. As long as you're living, which is a great thing, right? And we want to be thankful for that, grateful for that. As long as you're living, there will always be things that need to leave the house. There will always be stuff to be decluttered. Realizing that was huge for me in actually changing my home. Realizing I didn't have an end date to look forward to gave me permission to just constantly be decluttering. Because here's the problem. Before, if I got rid of something and I realized, oh, I should have gotten rid of this a long time ago, it made me feel like, well, see, I'm terrible at this. See, I'm a failure. I can't declutter. I'm not good at this. That's why this thing was still in my house and I should have gotten rid of it 3 years ago. I'm like, no, there's always stuff to get rid of. So I can just get rid of it and I can remove that shame aspect. It removes so much of the shame when you just go, this is going to be something I'm doing forever. And taking away the shame is often the thing that allows me to actually get started. So that has been one of the most helpful things to me in actually changing my home, was realizing there's not an end date. And also to know I was able to handle my home long before my home was completely decluttered, which it's never going to be, right? But long before it was perfect, because it's never going to be, my house was handleable and not overwhelming to me anymore. And so think about that. Say, even if you look at your house and you go, yeah, all the stuff she said, this is still going to take me 7 years. Huh. If that's true, awesome. You're going to be so much better off for starting today. Even if it really does take the 7 years, those of us who struggle with clutter are rarely good at assessing how long this kind of stuff will take. We want to be really good at it, so we spend a lot of time working on assessing it. But the reality is, even if you're right, and it does take a full 7 years, if you declutter in a visible space today, throwing away trash, your house is going to be easier to manage tonight, tomorrow. It's going to be easier to walk around in. It's going to be less overwhelming. It may still be overwhelming, but it's going to be handleable to you long before you ever get to that perfect place. And you might be like me and realize, you know what? Actually, my goal was this, not the perfect picture worthy home. That, I hope, encourages you. I hear from a lot of you that you do find it very encouraging to have that same realization that I had of, oh, wait, it's never going to end. Oh, okay. Which means if ending on the decluttering is never a thing, then that means I didn't fail because I did some great decluttering and then, oh no, clutter came back into no, it's just life. It's just life. Just keep on decluttering. Okay. If you want to speed it up, throw away more trash. Throw away more trash. Donate more obvious donations, more donations. Go harder on those non-thinking things just to get stuff out of the house. I just want to be clear, like this, it isn't the people, I feel like I've said this, but the people who are asking me this question, right? As someone who truly has come from a house that was completely out of control and had truckloads of extra stuff in it. The people asking me this question are rarely the people who can do I go through my house in one weekend and I've got it completely decluttered. People like that exist, right? But those are not usually the ones asking me this question. A lot of y'all asking me this question are people like me who it is going to take you longer. Okay. So I want to encourage you that it's worth it. If your goal is better and you do anything, your house is going to achieve that goal of better by doing anything. And with every little bit better that it just gets better. Like it just gets better, right? And it's easier to maintain. And then you'll hit your clutter threshold by decluttering. You can't predict what your clutter threshold is. There's not a quiz to take. You just know that if my house is still overwhelming to me, I'm not under my clutter threshold and I need to keep decluttering. And I just want to leave you with one last thing. Remember that people who have homes that are clutter-free don't stress as much about doing the perfect thing with their stuff, how they get rid of things, making sure, that they do the, most noble, ecological, blah, blah, blah. The people who don't have clutter in their homes don't stress as much about doing over the perfect thing as those of us who tend to have more stuff, right? So defaulting to, I'm just going to get it out, that's the best way. And also, remember that people who have homes that are clutter-free prefer to live with regret than with clutter. They choose the possibility of regretting getting rid of something over the guaranteed fact of it sitting in their house as clutter, not having a home, being in the way, making life harder to live. They choose regret over that. I hope that was helpful. I hope you're having a wonderful beginning of the year here. Cannot believe it's already 2025. It's not actually when I'm recording it, but you know what I mean when you're listening. Don't forget that Take Your House Back is on sale right now, and go grab it so you can join in with the all-day declutter, because those are days of the year when you can make leaps and bounds of progress. That's the course I do with Cass from Clutterbug and Dawn from Minimal Mom. Go to aslobcomesclean.com/take to grab that. And also go check out my new book that comes out in February. All right. All that will be in the show notes. All right. I will talk to y'all later. Bye.